Do you know what finally convinced me, at 98 years old, that most people are asking the wrong question about protein? It wasn't a book. It wasn't a doctor. It was my own body, quietly changing over decades, responding differently to the same foods I thought I understood. For most of my life, I believed what many still believe today, that meat was strength and anything else was secondary. I grew up in a time when a plate without meat looked incomplete, almost like something was missing from life itself. And for years, I felt strong, capable, even proud of that belief. But here is the truth I wish someone had told me earlier. Your body does not care about beliefs. It responds to biology. As I aged, I began to notice subtle shifts. My digestion slowed. My energy became less predictable. Recovery after even small physical efforts took longer. At first, I blamed age alone. That's what most people do. But age, I learned, is not just decline. It is exposure. It reveals what has been working quietly for you and what has been working against you all along. So I began to observe more carefully, not with fear, but with curiosity. I paid attention to how different foods made me feel, not just immediately, but hours later, even days later. And this is where my understanding of protein began to change. You see, protein is not just about how much you eat. It is about how your body uses it. This is where the real comparison begins, not on the plate, but inside your cells. When I ate heavy meat meals, I felt full, yes, but I also felt something else, slower, heavier, as if my body was working harder than it needed to. It was subtle, but consistent. On the other hand, when I began incorporating more plant-based proteins, especially soy, something different happened. I didn't feel weaker, as I had feared. I felt lighter. My digestion became more efficient. My energy more stable. At first I resisted this realization because it challenged everything I had been taught. But the body is an honest teacher. It does not argue. It responds. And that is when I understood something essential. The real question is not which protein is stronger, but which protein does your body handle more effectively over time. This is where science and experience meet. Meat protein is complete, rich in essential amino acids, especially leucine, which stimulates muscle protein synthesis. That is true, but it also comes with a metabolic cost, higher acid load, more complex digestion, and depending on the type, compounds that may increase inflammation over time. Soy protein, on the other hand, was once dismissed as incomplete. But that is no longer accurate. It contains all essential amino acids, has a high digestibility score, and interacts differently with the body, affecting cholesterol, hormonal pathways, and even cellular stress responses in ways that are in many cases protective. So the question became clearer to me, not simpler but clearer. What supports the body better is not just what builds it quickly, but what sustains it gently, efficiently, over a lifetime. And at 98, I can tell you this with certainty. The body always keeps score. If you want to understand which protein truly supports your body better, you must stop thinking in terms of tradition and start thinking in terms of physiology. At 98, I no longer trust what sounds strong. I trust what the body can sustain. Let me take you deeper into what I discovered, not through theory alone, but through years of quiet observation aligned with what science now confirms. The first thing you must understand is this: not all proteins are used by the body in the same way. On paper, protein is protein, a chain of amino acids. But inside your body, those chains are broken down, absorbed, reassembled, and regulated through highly complex metabolic pathways. What matters is not just what enters your mouth, but what your body can digest, absorb, and utilize efficiently. This is where digestibility becomes critical. Scientists measure this using systems like PDCA-ACE and DIA-ACE, methods that evaluate how well a protein provides essential amino acids and how effectively those amino acids are absorbed. For many years, animal proteins like meat were considered superior because of their high scores. They are dense in essential amino acids, particularly leucine, which plays a key role in triggering muscle protein synthesis through the mTOR pathway. And yes, if your only goal is rapid muscle building, meat has an advantage. It delivers a strong anabolic signal, but here is what most people overlook. Stimulation is not the same as sustainability. The mTOR pathway, when activated appropriately, supports growth and repair, but chronic overstimulation, especially over decades, has been associated with accelerated aging and increased risk of certain diseases. Your body is not designed to be in a constant state of growth signaling. It is designed for balance. This is where soy protein begins to reveal its unique role. Soy also contains all essential amino acids, making it a complete protein, something that was once widely misunderstood. Its digestibility score is high, often comparable to animal protein, but its leucine content is slightly lower, meaning it stimulates muscle protein synthesis more moderately. At first glance, this may seem like a disadvantage, but over a lifetime, moderation becomes an advantage. Soy provides enough stimulus for maintenance and repair without excessively activating growth pathways. It is, in a sense, a quieter signal, one that the body can manage without strain, but the difference does not stop at amino acids. It extends into how these proteins interact with your internal environment. When I was younger, I never thought about metabolic load. I ate until I felt full, assuming my body would handle the rest. But as I aged, I realized that digestion itself is a form of work. Every meal requires energy to break down, absorb, and process nutrients. And not all foods demand the same effort. Meat, especially red and processed meat, requires more intensive digestion. It can increase the production of certain metabolites, like TMAO, which has been linked to cardiovascular risk. It also contributes to a higher dietary acid load, which the body must buffer to maintain pH balance. Over time, this can place subtle stress on systems like the kidneys and bones. Soy protein, by contrast, tends to be metabolically lighter. It is often accompanied by fiber, phytonutrients, and compounds like isoflavones, which have been studied for their potential to support cardiovascular health. These compounds interact with estrogen receptors in a way that may help regulate hormonal balance, particularly in aging populations. I did not understand these mechanisms when I was younger, but I felt their effects. After meals centered around plant-based proteins, my body did not feel burdened. There was no heaviness, no lingering fatigue, just a quiet sense of equilibrium. And then there is the matter of inflammation. This is perhaps the most important factor that no one talks about when comparing proteins. Inflammation is not always visible. It does not always cause immediate pain, but it operates silently, influencing everything from joint health to cardiovascular function to cognitive decline. Over time, chronic low-grade inflammation becomes one of the defining features of aging. Certain types of meat, particularly processed and high-temperature cooked meats, can contribute to inflammatory processes through compounds like advanced glycation end products, AGs, and oxidized lipids. This does not mean that all meat is harmful, but it does mean that the way it is consumed and the quantity matters greatly. Soy protein, on the other hand, has been associated in many studies with anti-inflammatory effects. Its isoflavones and antioxidant components may help reduce oxidative stress, which is closely linked to inflammation. Again, this is not about extremes, it is about direction. Over decades, small differences in inflammatory load accumulate into significant outcomes. Now let us talk about the concern that many people still have: hormones. I remember when I first heard that soy contains phytoestrogens. It sounded alarming. People said it would disrupt hormones, feminize men, cause imbalance. I avoided it for years because of fear. But later I learned something important. Phytoestrogens are not the same as human estrogen. They are much weaker, and they interact with the body in a modulatory way. In many cases, they act more like regulators than disruptors. In populations that consume soy regularly, there is no consistent evidence of harmful hormonal effects. In fact, some studies suggest benefits, particularly in reducing certain risks associated with aging. Fear often comes from misunderstanding, and misunderstanding can keep you from discovering what your body truly needs. There is also the question of longevity. At 98, I do not measure success by how much muscle I can build. I measure it by how well my body continues to function, how clearly I can think, how steadily I can move, how little I am burdened by disease. When I look at populations around the world that live long, healthy lives, I notice a pattern. Their diets are not centered on heavy meat consumption. They include plant-based proteins regularly, often daily. Soy, in various forms, appears frequently, not as a replacement forced by restriction, but as a natural part of the diet. This does not mean that meat has no place. It means that balance matters more than dominance. So when you ask which supports your body better, you must define what you mean by support. If you mean rapid growth, short-term strength, immediate anabolic response, then meat has a clear role. But if you mean long-term function, metabolic efficiency, reduced inflammation, and sustained health over decades, then soy offers advantages that cannot be ignored. The truth is not as simple as choosing one and rejecting the other, but it is also not as vague as people make it seem. Your body is constantly negotiating between growth and repair, stimulation and recovery, load and efficiency. The foods you choose determine how that negotiation unfolds over time. At 98, I no longer chase what is strongest. I choose what is most sustainable. And sustainability, I have learned, is the quiet foundation of a life that lasts. But there is a deeper layer to this conversation that most people never reach, and it is this: Your body does not operate in isolated systems. Protein does not just build muscle. It interacts with your metabolism, your hormones, your organs, your nervous system. Every process is interconnected. And over a long life, it is not the intensity of any one effect that defines your health, but the accumulation of all of them. At 98, I have had enough time to see patterns repeat across decades. I have watched people grow strong quickly and decline just as quickly. I have also seen others age slowly, almost quietly, maintaining function not because they pushed their bodies harder, but because they burdened them less. And when I look closely, diet, especially protein choice, always plays a role in that difference. Let us begin with muscle, because this is where most people focus their attention. You have likely heard that animal protein is superior for muscle growth because of its amino acid profile and leucine content. This is correct, but incomplete. Muscle protein synthesis is only one side of the equation. The other side is muscle preservation over time. As we age, the body becomes less responsive to anabolic signals. This is called anabolic resistance. In younger years, a strong stimulus like a high leucine meal from meat produces a clear response. But in older age, the body requires not just stronger signals, but more efficient systems to support recovery, circulation, and cellular repair. This is where plant-based proteins, including soy, begin to show a different kind of advantage. They are often accompanied by nutrients that support endothelial function, improve blood flow, and reduce oxidative stress. These factors indirectly support muscle preservation by ensuring that nutrients and oxygen are delivered effectively to tissues. In other words, muscle is not just built by protein, it is maintained by the environment in which that protein operates. When I shifted my diet later in life, I noticed that I did not lose strength as I had feared. Instead, I maintained it more consistently. My recovery improved, not because I was stimulating my muscles more aggressively, but because my body was under less systemic strain. Now consider the liver, an organ most people rarely think about until something goes wrong. The liver is responsible for processing amino acids, converting excess nitrogen into urea, and managing a wide range of metabolic functions. High intake of animal protein increases the workload on the liver, particularly when it comes to nitrogen metabolism. This does not mean that the liver cannot handle it. It can, but over decades, increased metabolic demand contributes to cumulative stress. This is subtle. You will not feel it immediately. But the body keeps track. Soy protein and plant proteins in general tend to produce less metabolic waste in this context. They still provide the amino acids needed for repair and maintenance, but with a different metabolic profile, one that may be less taxing over time. And then there is the kidney. I have known many people who lived most of their lives without thinking about kidney function, only to face problems later that seem to appear suddenly, but nothing in the body happens suddenly. It is always the result of years of gradual change. High-protein diets, particularly those rich in animal protein, increase the filtration load on the kidneys. Again, in a healthy individual, this is manageable, but as the body ages, resilience decreases. What was once easily handled becomes more demanding. When I reduced my reliance on heavy animal protein and incorporated more plant-based sources, I did not notice a dramatic change overnight. But over time, there was a sense of ease, a reduction in the internal pressure that I cannot fully describe, but that I could clearly feel. Now let us talk about the gut, because this is where everything truly begins. Digestion is not just about breaking down food. It is about interaction with trillions of microorganisms that influence your immune system, your metabolism, even your mood. Animal protein, especially when consumed in excess and without sufficient fiber, can alter the gut microbiome in ways that favor the production of metabolites associated with inflammation. Compounds like TMAO, which I mentioned earlier, originate from interactions between certain nutrients in meat and gut bacteria. Soy and other plant proteins, however, often come with fiber and prebiotic components that support a more diverse and balanced microbiome. This in turn influences inflammation, immune function, and metabolic health. I did not know the word microbiome when I was younger, but I knew what it felt like when my digestion was smooth, when my body felt in harmony rather than resistance. Now I understand that what I was feeling was the result of systems working together efficiently. There is also the question of energy, not the kind you feel immediately after a meal, but the kind that sustains you throughout the day. Stable energy is a sign of metabolic balance. When your body is constantly managing heavy loads, digestive, inflammatory, metabolic, it has less capacity to maintain that balance. I found that when I relied more on plant-based proteins, my energy did not spike and crash. It remained steady. This may seem like a small thing, but over years, it changes how you live. It affects your clarity, your patience, your ability to move through the day without fatigue. And now we must address something even more fundamental: aging itself. Aging is not just the passage of time. It is the accumulation of cellular damage, the gradual decline of repair mechanisms, and the increasing difficulty of maintaining internal balance. Every choice you make either accelerates or slows this process. Protein plays a role here through pathways like mTOR and IGF-1. High intake of animal protein, particularly in excess, has been associated with increased activity in these pathways. While this supports growth, it may also accelerate aging when chronically elevated. Plant-based proteins, including soy, tend to modulate these pathways more gently. They provide the building blocks needed for maintenance without pushing the system into overdrive. This balance between enough and too much is where longevity lives. At 98, I do not speak from theory. I speak from time. I have seen what happens when the body is pushed too hard for too long. And I have experienced what happens when it is supported in a way that allows it to endure. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with a truth that is both simple and difficult to accept. There is no single best protein in isolation. There is only the protein that aligns with your body's needs at a given time in your life. In youth, when growth and strength are priorities, animal protein may offer advantages. But as the years pass, the priorities shift. The body no longer needs to be pushed. It needs to be supported. And this is where soy, and plant-based proteins more broadly, begin to stand out, not as replacements, but as refinements. They represent a shift from intensity to balance, from force to efficiency. If I could speak to my younger self, I would not tell her to avoid meat completely. I would tell her to understand it, to see it not as the foundation of every meal, but as one component among many, And I would tell her not to underestimate the quiet power of foods that work with the body, rather than demanding more from it. Because in the end, your body is not a machine to be driven. It is a system to be sustained. And the way you nourish it will determine not just how long you live, but how well you live for all those years. So after everything I have lived through, everything I have tested quietly within my own body, let me answer the question as clearly as I can. Which supports your body better, soy or meat protein? The honest answer is this. It depends on what you are asking your body to do and how long you expect it to keep doing it. If your goal is immediate strength, rapid muscle gain, and strong anabolic signaling, meat protein delivers that efficiently. It is dense, powerful, and direct. But power, I have learned, always comes with a cost if it is used without awareness. Over time, that cost appears not all at once, but gradually in inflammation, in metabolic strain, in systems that begin to work harder than they should. Soy protein, on the other hand, does something very different. It does not push the body aggressively. It supports it quietly. It provides all the essential amino acids with high digestibility, but without overstimulating the pathways that accelerate aging. It works in harmony with systems that regulate cholesterol, inflammation, and cellular stress. It is not louder, it is steadier. And at 98 years old, steadiness is what remains. What I have come to understand is that the body does not reward extremes, it rewards balance. The question is not which protein is better in isolation, but which pattern of eating allows your body to function with the least resistance over the longest period of time. For me, that answer became clear only after I stopped choosing based on habit and started choosing based on response. I did not eliminate meat entirely, but I no longer centered my life around it. I allowed plant-based proteins, especially soy, to take a more consistent role. And over time, my body felt less burdened, more stable, more capable of continuing. This is what most people misunderstand. Longevity is not built on intensity. It is built on sustainability. Every meal you eat is either increasing the load your body must manage or supporting its ability to manage that load. And while you may not feel the difference today, your body is recording it quietly, patiently, without judgment. If you remember anything from my life, let it be this: do not ask only what builds you faster. Ask what allows you to endure longer. Because in the end, the strongest body is not the one that grows the quickest. It is the one that keeps going.